Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 71 of Literacy in Color. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by someone whose work is making a tremendous impact on classrooms across the country. Ashley Doty is the founder of Uncomplicate Ed, a company dedicated to helping educators focus on what truly matters for student learning. Before launching her organization, Ashley spent more than 20 years in education as a teacher, instructional coach, assistant principal, and principal. She also brings a unique background in theater, which you'll hear influences the way she thinks about engagement and communication. Ashley and her team at Uncomplicate Ed are known for taking big concepts like the science of learning and translating them into simple, sustainable, high-leverage practices that work for real teachers with real kids. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with her and explore what it actually looks like to make learning stick, to uncomplicate without oversimplifying, and to support students at the highest levels with the science of learning in mind. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with Ashley Doty, who is the founder of a company called Uncomplicate Ed, which is a fun play on words. Her mission is to make teaching and learning very uncomplicated for those involved, and a lot of her work is grounded in the science of learning. So we are going to be chatting about what the science of learning can actually look like in schools. And I'm so excited to tap into her expertise on this topic. So welcome to the show, Ashley.
Thank you, Michelle. I am so pleased to be here. So thank you for having me.
I'm happy to have you here. So maybe we can take a moment to talk a bit about your experience and how you got to this whole realm of your business and being immersed in the science of learning, because your path is a unique one. You have experience with theater and leadership. And so maybe you can paint a picture of how you got to be where you are.
I would love to. So I'll start by saying I am from Tennessee. So went to school there, college there. I actually studied theater and accounting. True Gemini here is who you are speaking with. After college, I actually got my first acting gig up in Minnesota. So it took me up into Minnesota area and I got to tour the entire upper Midwest, going straight into classrooms. We were actually called actor educators. And we used theater to talk about subjects like social justice. So how to stand up to bullying and how to help the environment and how to accept differences. So anyways, I did that for a few years and it was so enjoyable. And I was also doing regional theater at the time, by the way. And I was doing one of my last shows. I got to be my dream role. I'd always wanted to be Juliet. I finally got to be Juliet. And I remember one of the nights we were doing the curtain call, and, everyone's clapping and that's great. It feels good. But I remember thinking like, this just isn't it for me anymore. Like, I don't feel like I'm making a difference, except for the people who could afford the tickets. I want to make a bigger difference. So I leaned back into my education skills, being an actor educator. And I decided, let's do this. I want to be a teacher. Ever since I was a kid, by the way, I wanted to be a teacher. So I was lucky enough to get into Teach for America. That brought me down to Florida, where I am today. So I've been a teacher, instructional coach, assistant principal, and then principal for a few years before starting Uncomplicate Ed a few years ago. Like you said, we just want to uncomplicate education. So it's been a really wonderful adventure.
That is so cool. I love that backstory. And here I was just thinking you're doing theater just for fun. And it really was, you had this pivotal moment of driving your whole career path this way. And you think about it, you take a passion and something like theater is used to entertain people, and you wanted to turn it into something that is really inspirational and powerful in a greater way and affecting our children. So kudos to you. That's really, really amazing. So I love this phrase, uncomplicate ed, and it's at the heart of your work, and it's evident that it's something that you're so passionate about. So what does that mean to you, especially in the context of applying the science of learning in schools?
Absolutely. So we all know we are educators. We are in the classrooms. We are in schools, leading schools. It's hard enough as is. As is, it is already a challenging, worthwhile, and challenging career. And then things that are complicated when they don't need to be get put in and making it even more challenging. So I wanted to create a space or a movement even where we can remove anything that is getting in the way of just doing what we need to do, whether that be teaching the students right in front of us, or I'm coaching and supporting the teachers I serve, or I'm leading my building, or I'm leading my district. How can we, without oversimplifying, how can we better uncomplicate the unnecessary so that all students can learn at high levels?
Yeah, that's really great. And Dr. Anita Archer is always saying, teach this stuff and cut the fluff. And I love how you talked about not oversimplifying, but not making it complicated. Like, what are the high leverage things that we have to do in our day to make learning happen? So it's really tapping into these power moves. Like, how does the brain learn, and what can we do to make that happen for all of our students? And really, there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of strategies out there. Teachers are not short of strategies in this world. But can you share what really matters in order for learning to truly take place? And what are maybe some of the must-dos that we should have in our classroom for our instructional practices? Or what are some look-fors that we can be mindful of when we're thinking of our instruction?
I think you nailed it when you said there's no shortage of strategies. And I think that is sometimes the problem. We know so many things can work, but what's going to work most of the time for most of the students? And I think there's a quote from Dr. Shanahan that always gets me. And he was talking specifically about reading when he said a lot of things work in reading, but they don't work equally well. I'm paraphrasing. It's something like that. And I thought, oh my gosh, yes, this is why sometimes as teachers, we can be drowning in ideas because we know, well, this will kind of work for this kid and this will kind of work for this student. Let's look at what the research says will work for most of the kids most of the time. So when we're looking at instructional strategies, I started digging into cognitive science of learning. What are the biggest bang for buck strategies? What is worth putting our time and energy in, our very precious, non-renewable resource of time? What is worth putting our time into? And of course, there's still a few with cognitive science. And what you're going to hear about a lot, if anyone goes out there and they start reading about it, is they're going to hear a lot about retrieval practice. Retrieval, retrieval, retrieval. So the idea of once it gets in my brain and encoded, and I've stored it in some kind of way. I have to call it latch learning. So I've hooked it onto something I already know. There's that background knowledge. If I really want to move something into long-term memory, then I need to retrieve it as much as possible. And it also goes with the concept of spaced practice. So I need to retrieve it. After I first learn it, I need to retrieve it pretty soon, pretty quickly. And then I need to actually space it out. I need to let a little bit of forgetting go in, just a little bit, before I bring it back out. Then a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And one of my favorite metaphors for this is phone numbers. And how many phone numbers, those of us that did not grow up with cell phones, how many phone numbers did we have memorized as children compared to how many we have memorized today? And why is it that there are some phone numbers that we have not dialed in decades that we still remember? And it all comes back to we had to retrieve it from memory. We didn't go look it up in grandma's address book. We retrieved it from memory and over a long period of time. We also got immediate feedback, and that's another crux. And we've heard that in education forever. But when it gets tied to brain research, something feels a little bit more cemented with that. So let's go back to the phone numbers. If I was trying to call my friend Erin and I was like, wait, was it a 6 or an 8? I don't remember. You tried it, right? You're like, let's try 6. Well, when your friend's mama did not answer the phone, it was somebody else. You got immediate feedback that you were wrong. And you're like, sorry, wrong number. Now, did any of us go, oh, well, I'll try again tomorrow? No. We immediately tried again with the correct information. So as teachers, as educators, how can we close the gap between a student retrieving and getting feedback, but then immediately implementing that feedback in a correct way? Those are two huge, don't require a trip to the copier strategies that are high leverage, best bang for buck. Any teacher could do tomorrow.
I love those. And I think your example with the phone number is the perfect way to put that into perspective, because so many of us, if there's any millennials out there where we were calling our friends on the phone, pushing the button, saying the numbers out loud over and over again until it's kind of, and I don't like to say memorized, but remembered. We had all of this practice to remember it. I love how you talked about latch learning and having the information to have something to stick to. And I think that's really powerful because I think in the science of reading realm, there's such an emphasis on building background knowledge. And I think some teachers have this idea that we have to teach the kids everything about a topic. Say they're learning about a historical time and you have to get all of that information in. But the truth is that we're building knowledge bit by bit, and maybe they're going to learn a little bit of this information this year, and maybe next year you're going to build on that, and then they latch it on to something that they've learned in the past, and you're going to continually build your knowledge. And none of us are going to be experts in a topic in one sitting. It takes a lifetime. As adults, we're learning things every single day. So I think that's a nugget to hold on to, that we have to connect new knowledge to something that is in our long-term memory and to retrieve that old knowledge in when we're learning something new. And your whole concept of space practice, I think, is so important too, because there's also, I believe this is an Anita Archer thing as well. I taught it, but did they learn it? And maybe you taught it once and then you never get back to it again. So we want to make sure that you're bringing it back. We have that continued practice, and you have those opportunities for our students to really solidify their learning. I just got back from the Reading League yesterday at the time that we're recording, and the keynote speaker was David Scher, and he was talking about his self-teaching hypothesis. But one of the examples that he was using is how our brain remembers information. And he put up on the board, it reminded me when you talked about phone numbers, he put up on his presentation a string of maybe like 11 numbers, and he flashed it at us for like 5 seconds. And then he was like, did you remember it? Turn into next to you, like, what was that string? And we're like, oh my gosh, like, I don't remember it already. And then he showed a phone number, how we have an area code in parentheses, and then the first few numbers, and then a dash, and the next few numbers, and seeing it even in the chunks was so helpful for our brain. And so
Mhm.
to have the chunking as well, I think is really powerful. So when you gave that phone number example, that was the first thing I thought of because that was
Yeah.
fresh in my head.
Yes, that is a perfect example. And chunking, I remember hearing about that when I first got into education years ago. And I was like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, small chunks. But I didn't really get it. And I think part of that chunking is also rolling it around and working memory for a while. So there's that practice period. There's that, like, I've got to work with it, whether I am sharing it with another student or I am presenting on it or doing the form of reciprocal teaching or just practice. The longer I can also keep that rumbling around and working memory, the better a chance I get of moving it to long term. So that is so true.
Definitely. I love the rumbling around. So, in your experience as a principal and as a coach, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've seen or heard about the science of learning?
Great question. I think as humans, we have a tendency to want something to be all in or all not. And science of learning, just like science of reading, just like everything, because we're working with humans and humans are complex creatures, requires nuance. So while I said retrieval is one of the biggest bang for buck strategies, it does not mean I do it all the time, regardless, no matter what. It still takes that professionalism for us as educators. And there was a recent, it was actually a tweet or whatever we call them these days from Daniel Willingham, who is, if you guys want to read something on science of learning, Daniel Willingham is great for it. But he actually was quoting someone else named Carl Hendrick, who talked about getting the nuance of even just retrieval. And I'll go ahead and quote it. He says, saying something like using retrieval practice when learners have established some knowledge of the material, da 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 da. It's like so wordy. And he's like, that doesn't sound as good. That is less compelling than just always retrieve. But honestly, and that's where the nuance of not complicating everything or not uncomplicating everything, we can have a tendency to oversimplify. So there still takes the gut check. The knowing my student is still always going to come up as a number one thing to say, is this a time to retrieve just yesterday's lesson, just yesterday? Or is this a time to retrieve last month? Or is this a time to retrieve last year? So knowing when to put those in motion, there's that art in the art and science of teaching as well. So I would say that's a main misconception is we overgeneralize at times. So still keep this knowing our students at the heart of all decision making.
That was really powerful. And I think oftentimes when we hear science, we think there's a perfect formula for getting the same exact outcome in every scenario. And that's
right.
doing something like chemistry, right? But when we have these human brains in front of us with emotions and perspectives and different backgrounds, there is so much nuance there. And I'm so appreciative of you saying that because oftentimes we make things so black and white, and it's not always black and white. And there can be things that we need to adjust in our instruction. And one thing can work for one student and another student might need more time to grapple. They might need a different approach to grapple. And we have to make those kind of on the spot decisions as teachers sometimes, which isn't always in a randomized controlled study for us to do. So
right.
yeah, it's helpful to know that there's humanity in the science of learning as well.
Absolutely.
So, from the lens of a teacher, what advice do you have for a teacher who's supposed to take what they might know about how the brain works when it's trying to learn new information and make it fit into their literacy block?
I think so much great research has come out recently and put into practice with science of reading. I think about UFly. I know a lot of people are familiar with that program, which uses a lot of the principles of the science of learning, such as interleaving. And the idea that I'm just going to teach a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this and stretch that out over a longer period of time as opposed to living in an isolated unit. How can we take that and apply that to other aspects of literacy? And one of my favorite examples of this is with poetry. I don't know about you, but for me, poetry lived in a unit. It was the poetry unit. And it usually happened in April because that was poetry month. So what happened is we never really did poetry except for in that unit. So what happened as a result? Well, one, we got an illusion of learning because they were able to cram it really well and spit it out pretty quickly for the test. But then they don't get it again for a whole nother year in the next grade. A unit's usually 20 days. So they're only getting 20 days of poetry a year. In a K-5 sequence, that's 6 grades. That's only 120 days. That's not even a whole school year of poetry. And we wonder why students struggle to retain it. And even as adults, sometimes we struggle. We get intimidated by teaching poetry because maybe we were taught that same way. We only had it once a year. So let's think about that in terms of interleaving. Maybe you don't have the autonomy to move your units around, which is a lot of us. So we did not have the autonomy. Fine, get it, totally get it. What can we do? 5 minutes of one poem every day. One poem a week for 5 minutes each day. Just one. Make it short, really, really short. This works for any grade level, literally K to 12. One poem, same poem all week. And if it's a real doozy, sure, make it 2. But what's that going to help us with? Fluency, because poetry is meant to be read aloud. So we're practicing reading aloud. And that's, again, true for every grade level is important. Figurative language, the beast that is figurative language. We're now going to tame that beast because we're going to have it every day. You get vocab, you get poetry. We lose the intimidation. It's a shorter text. That is a great example of how to interleave. If I don't have the autonomy to switch up my entire scope and sequence, what if we just planted 5 minutes of poetry every day? That is probably one of my favorite strategies. And I just thought of another one. Michelle, can I share another one?
Of course.
This one's called the weekly barbecue. And this comes from the book Powerful Teaching by Agarwal and Bain. And I hope I'm saying their names right. They have a strategy called weekly barbecue. It stands for big basket quiz or big basket of questions. And it is a retrieval practice. So each time you give an assessment, an exit ticket, whatever, make one extra copy, single-sided, and cut up the questions and put them in a basket. And every so often, maybe you make it every Tuesday, you put your hand in the basket and you say, okay, let's number a paper 1 to 5, or on your whiteboard, or using Plickr, whatever it is, number 1 is. And you are retrieving things from who knows how far back. And if you teach all subjects, even better, mix it all in. So you could have a science question, social studies question, reading question. That's how we're going to help with retrieval. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be graded. It certainly can. But what a great way to dissolve the illusion of learning. Well, I thought that they had this. I thought I taught this. Well, you did. But the brain was working at optimum efficiency and you didn't use it. So guess what happened? They said, you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So we're going to purposely bring that back, but we can make it in a fun way. So I love those weekly barbecues. Highly recommend.
I love that as well. And it just reminds me too how oftentimes when you don't use spaced practice or interleaving, we teach once and it's like the sit, get, and forget. And then they got it for that time being or for that unit. And then 2 units down, it might as well be a foreign language because they lost it. So having that BBQ, I think, is a really fun way to make sure that things are integrated. And as you were talking about poetry, something that came to mind is also schools that were using balanced literacy programs who maybe they have like 1 or 2 nonfiction units a year. And then it's like, find the main idea for the entire yeah, and then it's just find the main idea. But we can find the main idea all year round. We can find the gist of every single read aloud that we're reading and make sure that it's not just concentrated into this month, but into the whole scope of our learning, because that is a challenge in any kind of text all of the time. And for our students to truly develop that skill, we want to make sure that we're doing it time and time again.
Absolutely. And just to that point too, it doesn't have to just be poetry. So to your nonfiction point, put in a speech.
Yeah.
So now we can weave in some history, some science. We can front load for a unit coming up down the road that we know they might particularly struggle with. So let me front load. Here is a speech from Abraham Lincoln, because I know in another unit coming up, we're going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln. So now I've given them a hook to latch onto for future learning.
Those are some really great examples. And do you have maybe a concrete story of a teacher in your experiences where they applied some principles from the science of learning and you saw a shift in student outcomes?
Yes, yes. I've got a few, so it's hard to decide. I'm going to share math first. Is that okay, Michelle? Can I share math one first?
Yeah.
Okay. There was an idea of interleaving in math. Now, I don't know about you, but I did teach all subjects, and we would have the students, you get to the end of the year and they're like, you never taught us this. And you're like, oh my goodness. Yes, I did. Do you want to see my lesson? The anchor chart's still on the wall because they've forgotten it. So one of the ways to combat that, one of the biggest things we can do really in any subject area is that interleaving. So I created literally one sheet of paper, one page of a scope and sequence. I did it for fourth grade math. I'm here in Florida, so it's for Florida best benchmarks. And I gave it out for free. Like, here, anybody use it, please go for it. Well, one teacher, I don't even know her, messaged me out of the blue. And she said, Ashley, I just had to let you know, we used your scope and sequence. We took the curriculum we had and we basically chopped it up to work with the scope and sequence. And our scores are already up. This was at winter. We take 3 tests a year at winter, have already grown like 15 something percent. And when people ask what we've done differently, we say it's a scope and sequence. And I was like, thank you so much for sharing. And she said, I'm trying to get other grade levels on board. Can you send me anything you've got on the literature? Of course, I sent it to her. Okay, so fast forward. Now it's like May. So we've given the end of year state test. I have not reached out to her. Totally unprompted. She says, Ashley, I just have to let you know, as a school now, we are I think it was 22 percentage points higher in proficiency year over year, not just beginning to end of year over year. And I completely credit it to just changing our focus calendar, our sequence. And I was like, wow, like what that means for the teachers and the school, yes, but think about the effect that has on those students. That is some like potentially life-changing stuff right there. So that's one example. There's a math example. Another one I had a school I was working with, this was 5th grade literacy, and they decided to do poetry, 1 poem a week. They were like, we're going to take these shifts really small. Let's go 1 poem a week, 1 poem a week. And I did it in my classroom as well. And some of this comes from the work of Dr. Tim Rosinski and his fluency development lesson. We just kind of put a tweak on it. Anyway, so they decided 1 poem a week. Again, this is 5th grade, 5-10 minutes a day. They pulled some vocab naturally from it. They also introduced some of the historical background of when the poem was written to place it in time. So we're sneaking in other learning, right? We're sneaking in historical background knowledge. Anyways, by the end of the year, not only had their literacy scores gone up, which we could have predicted, and their poetry scores went up, which we could have predicted, it was seeing their fluency scores, their words correct per minute, an area where we often don't see as much growth when we get into upper elementary. That is what shifted. So now you've got students reading with more confidence. They're able to get through a text with more stamina because they can fluently get through the text. So now they can apply the more cognitive heavy stuff of finding the main idea. So there's just so many great things. And again, some of these don't require a trip to the copier. They are just small tweaks in understanding how the brain retains information.
Those are both amazing. Thank you for sharing the success stories, because I think it's really encouraging to a lot of educators to see that you don't have to overhaul everything, but with small tweaks, you can see really incredible, powerful outcomes. So those are amazing. Now everybody's got to email Ashley for insights on how to get started, right?
Please do.
Yeah. So you mentioned these terms, interleaving and retrieval. And I know we've talked about them before on the podcast as well, but for someone who maybe this is your first listen and these terms sound complicated, might be new vocabulary for you, can you briefly, let's maybe backtrack, and can you define those terms for us and explain how teachers can make, again, those simple tweaks rather than huge add-ons when using these practices?
Absolutely. So the idea of interleaving is, instead of things living in blocked units, which many curriculum are written in a blocked unit, and we can finish that unit sooner, instead, I'm actually going to take, let's just say for the sake of argument, 2 units. Let's split them in half and teach them on top of each other. That is the simplest way I can say that. But here's the thing to make it even better. If you want to level it up, they need to be topics, or it's best if they're topics that are easily confused or easily conflated. So we actually want to teach those at the same time rather than at separate times, because we're teaching discrimination along the way, or discernment. Because a lot of times I hear, we're not all here for testing. And it's a reality for some of us, right? Well, when they get to select all, Or they can narrow 2 down, but the other 2 are, one's kind of mostly right. They're both right. But which one's most right? And what they're going to see in the real world anyway. They're not going to be told what the genre of a text is and told to find the main idea. We're teaching these things so that they can pull out the information themselves. So rather than teaching them separately, teach them congruently, simultaneously. It's going to look slower because they're not going to finish that unit and then move on to the next one. It's going to feel slower, but it's going to lead to more long-term retention. And that's how UFly does their interleaving. That's why when we teach math word problems, we're not going to teach addition separate, subtraction separate, and then expect them to suddenly be able to put them both together and decide between the two. Let's teach them at the same time so we can teach that discrimination along the way and not resort to tricks. That's only going to get them so far. So there's interleaving, I guess.
There you go. I'm even thinking about phonemic awareness, and we don't just teach blending and then move on to segmenting. We can segment a word and then blend it back together, and you're doing them at the same time. So I think this idea can carry over to so many different topics. And then how about retrieval?
Yes. Okay. So retrieval, again, is when we go back in the brain and we retrieve information that we once learned. So that one's probably the easiest one for most people to understand. It's not about assessment, though. I mean, it can be. It can be assessed, but that is not the heart and soul purpose of retrieval. The idea of retrieval is, again, the more I use it, the less likely I am to lose it. So by having to go back in my brain and pull it out, the more likely I'm actually cementing it into long-term memory, which is why, by the way, when we talk about wait time, I cannot emphasize this enough. Wait time. Because we have some students who think maybe process a little bit faster than others. So guess what happens when we're constantly calling on those kids whose hands first go up in the air? Who's getting the most retrieval practice? Those same kids over and over and over and over again. So the smart start to, quote, get smarter. The others start to lag behind because one group is getting more retrieval practice. The other is able to opt out. And I say, even with random name generators, we can over rely on those. I'm not saying they're bad, but we can over rely on them because what happens is we tell all of our students I'm about to do a name generator. Who knows what's going to come up? So think about it so you're ready. How many students you really think are thinking about it? Close to none. And here's why. They are good at statistics and probability. Even 4 and 5-year-olds. They can see I'm in a room of 20 children. Only one's going to get called. I'm going to hedge my bets. And again, the brain wants to work at maximum efficiency, which means it's not thinking unless you make me. Okay. So if I do a random number generator or name generator every time, again, I'm not saying they're bad, but if I overuse it, then what happens? I call on Zoe. And what's Zoe going to likely say? I don't know. And so everyone else's shoulders in the class when Zoe's name was called relaxes. So I go, thank goodness it wasn't me. My bet paid off. And then also we're letting Zoe off the hook. Oh, let's phone a friend. They're probably going to phone the friend that everyone knew who was going to raise their hand in the beginning. So we need to shift that thinking to the more students I have retrieving more of the time, then the more learning is actually going to happen. So again, this does not require a trip to the copier. It is intentional wait time to get as many students as possible retrieving. That means we're getting more kids learning and moving information to long-term memory.
That was a great explanation. And I consider myself as one of those kids who needed the wait time.
Same.
I always needed time to think about my thoughts and how am I going to articulate these? I'm not exactly sure how to share my thoughts exactly until I have a little bit extra time to think about it. It was never like a blurted out, know the answer for me, even as an adult. And I love how you were talking about stop calling on kids. We need to make sure we have every student every time. And some schools have implemented like a no hand raising policy. And how can we engage the most learners in one scenario and give the students time to think before having them all respond chorally or to partnerships? Just having wait time is so, so important. I think it's something that we often take for granted when we consider the pacing of our day and wanting to move through content quickly. And I think that's an adult problem and not necessarily, I don't know, it's an adult problem that we feel like we have to rush and finish our content and move along our scope and sequence, but we really need to slow down in order to make sure that learning happens.
Yes, I always say it's not about what's taught, it's about what's learned. So if I'm just trying to get through material because I feel like there's a time crunch, then Okay, that's your choice, but you are going to eat that time up later on when you thought that they knew it and now you're having to review. So imagine the time saved. If I take it now, I'm going to have less when I get to end of the year. Let's review. And it's like, come on, guys, you should know this. You're right. But they didn't have enough retrieval practice, or it didn't get retrieved over time. It's gone. You are now going to reteach it. So eat the time now or eat it later. Let's eat it now.
Yeah, exactly. And you already talked about calling on kids, and Zoe always knows the answer. So Zoe's going to have more practice putting that information into her long-term memory. And so how can we take some of these principles in the science of learning and connect it to student engagement even and motivation, how this can even affect maybe student and teacher relationships?
Oh, so much. I feel like you just put it all together there so perfectly. A lot of times we think of student engagement as it has to be fun and noisy and all of that. It certainly can be. But when we're thinking about wanting students to be engaged, they are in it for the learning. And one of the ways the science of learning and teaching our own students, age appropriately, depending on their age, how their brain works, is one engagement strategy. It's also a motivation tool. So another book I highly recommend, I'm going to forget the author's name, but the book is called 10 to 25, and it's the science of motivating children. And it talks about teachers showing respect to their students by holding high expectations and by teaching them things that they historically would have held back. So I think about teaching students how your brain works. We are stopping in the middle of the book right now so that you can think in your head what has already happened and then share it with a partner. And why? Because you doing that and us putting it in working memory for just a little bit is going to help you remember it better. Isn't that cool how our brains work? So when you think about all of that you said, putting engagement and motivation and student-teacher relationships, it shows I believe in you. I can hold you to high expectations. You should know how the brain works. And I'm going to be the one that tells you why, so that when we get to retrieval, you know exactly why we're doing this. When I pull you to my small group to reteach a lesson, you know exactly why I'm doing it. I'm doing everything because I want you to not just learn it for now. I want you to learn it forever. And I always say too, we don't teach first grade. We teach students that are currently in first grade. We don't teach fourth grade. We teach students that are currently in fourth grade. So when we kind of think that mindset, then we do get motivation because we've held them to high expectations. We get engagement because they understand why they're learning, what they're learning, and we build the student and teacher relationship with that respect. Now, is there other elements that go into motivation and engagement? Of course there are. I am not going to sit here and oversimplify this, but I do think when you think about the relationship of science of learning to all of those pieces, it really can come back to science of learning, sharing that with students, and it gives them the why behind your what.
Definitely. And especially for students who find content like, what's the purpose of this? And
why are we learning this?
Exactly. And when you tie it back to their brain or the greater good of why it's important, especially, you talked about first grade, we're doing this for tomorrow. We're doing this for years from now, and everything has a stepping stone. And this is just one step on the staircase to bring you to new heights, down the road. And as you were talking about all of that, I was thinking about John Hattie's visible learning and how collective teacher efficacy has the greatest effect on student learning. And as you're saying all of this, I'm thinking about the power of the teacher and the power of the teachers working together to make all of this important. And teachers don't get enough credit for all the work that they do, and their role is so important in all of this. And when you have the knowledge of the science of reading and the science of learning and all the things, and you take into consideration the humanity of your students, like, this is no easy task here.
No, it is that's why Uncomplicate Ed, Michelle.
Exactly. I love it. So for the teacher who's trying to make their instruction uncomplicate ed and utilize some of these science of learning practices, what would be a great first step for them?
If they wanted to learn more, I would say there's a lot of literature out there right now on science of learning. I think an area that we aim to do is uncomplicate that for relevance and right now use in the classroom. So if I'm a teacher wanting to dig more into it, I highly recommend the website. I think it's called Retrieval Practice. It's from Pooja Agarwal from Powerful Teaching. So there's a bunch of free resources she has in there about retrieval practice. That's usually where we tell teachers to start in our trainings. Start with the barbecue. That is almost always everyone's favorite. Start with the barbecue. And by the time this podcast comes out, you're going to already have a few months into the year where you can now call back to something you taught in August, September, October. And it doesn't have to all be content related. It could be, what is the procedure to ask to go to the restroom? Or how do we raise our hands? Why is it important that we push in our chairs quietly? It can be a number of things. And that to me is one of the easiest, most fun, and high leverage strategies that a teacher could implement if she was wanting to start her journey, even as soon as tomorrow.
That's great. And what a great thing to do in morning meeting or even as a brain break to find little parts of time to squeeze it into your day. And since you have background as an administrator as well, do you have any advice for school leadership to get started?
Absolutely.
Call me.
Yes. So we always want, as leaders, we always want to do a practice what we preach approach, right? So as teachers, we are the leaders of our classroom. We want to practice what we preach for our students. School leaders practice what we preach with teachers. So if we've given some sort of training at back to school, in service, pre-service, whatever they call it, back in August, and you don't touch it again, guess what will happen? If you don't use it, they will lose it. So how can we even use retrieval practice with the teachers that we serve? We can't let it be a one and done. I said at the beginning of the year, so you should know this by now. That's not how humans work. It's not how the brain works. So how do we bring that back to life? Do we have ongoing PD? Do we have pictures of great observations in the classroom? Do we put it in our newsletter? Do we have a teacher share out something that's worked really well in her class? We have to be able to keep it alive. And then I also want to bring up the chunking part with this, because sometimes as school leaders, there's so much on our plates, just like with everyone in education, that we want to throw everything in at once. The human brain could really only grapple with 5 new bits of information at a time. So when you send a really long email and you're like, everyone should read it. I don't know why why aren't my teachers reading my emails? How long are they? Because they can't take in that much new information. Not because they're bad people, not because they're lazy. It's because the brain can only hold and work with 5 bits of new information at a time. So as school leaders, let's practice what we preach. Let's chunk out our learning. Let's think about the absorption. What is the main message we want to get across? And how can we retrieve and help our teachers retrieve the most important things throughout the year?
Those were really powerful tips. Thanks for sharing those. And it goes to show, too, how the power of coaching, and if your school or district has instructional coaches, why that work is so important in embedding that PD throughout the day in cycles regularly. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a one and done. And for your administrator also to be a coach and a leader in implementation, I think, is a critical piece there too. So, Ashley, this has been such a wonderful conversation. It's clear you're an expert in the science of learning, and I could listen to you chat about all of your stories all day. And I would love to hear more about Uncomplicate Ed and where we can find more information about your offerings there.
Thank you for saying that. So we've got our website, uncomplicateded.com. We also have, for any Facebook people out there, we have a Facebook group called Uncomplicating Education Across the Nation. You could literally just search for Uncomplicating Education Across the Nation and join that group. It is a public group where everyone shares just best practices or articles, all that good stuff out. And we are on all the socials. So if you look for Uncomplicate Ed, and make sure there's 2 E's in there.
No separate rules.
Right. Exactly. You will be able to find us on just about any social that is out there. And we share out blogs. We've had some on the science of learning as well. We really want to uncomplicate things for teachers. That's our passion. When it all comes down to it, it's we want all students to learn at high levels. We believe that they can. But we also believe that teachers are doing the very best that they can with the resources they have, that leaders want to see everyone succeed. Those are firm beliefs within Uncomplicated Ed. And because of that, they drive our resources. We do training. all of that is driven by when we know better, we can do better. When we've got great resources, we can implement them. And how can we do it without overcomplicating what is already a vastly big career and field?
Yeah, wonderful. We can link all of that in the show notes. And just to clarify, you work directly with schools as well?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we do training directly with schools and all around the country. We've mostly been in Florida thus far, but we're going all around the country. One of our favorite new resources we've created is called PD in a Box. And we're really excited about this. We're creating a science of learning one coming out soon. So far, what we actually have is student engagement, classroom management, and uncomplicating reading comprehension through poetry. So you've heard me talk a lot about poetry. I'm very passionate about how to use poetry as a means for uncomplicating reading comprehension, but they're all PD in a Box kits so that a coach, a school leader has the slides, has the handouts already stuffed in folders, like really ready to implement, fully research-based, aligned, cited, all of that. So yes, we do a lot of work. Anything that we can to help uncomplicate this field. We are all educators, so we are in it.
I love that. That sounds so fun and really powerful and impactful for any school who taps into those resources. So, Ashley, thanks again for joining me on the show. This has been so wonderful. And I hope to connect with you again and chat more about science of learning or anything else to uncomplicate education.
That would be great, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.